Some houses do not look broken from the road. They stand square against the wind, with smoke in the chimney and horses in the corral. And folks passing by think a family must be safe inside. But grief can sit at a supper table as plain as a person, waiting in an empty chair, cooling in a cup no one has the courage to move. And sometimes the one who saves a home is not the strongest person who lives there, but the one who refuses to leave when every door in it is trying to close. Miriam Bradshaw had one gloved hand on the iron gate of the Briggs Ranch when a bucket of cold pump water came flying off the porch and struck the ground so hard it splashed mud up the front of her black traveling dress. The bucket rolled to her boot and stopped there, rocking against the hem like a warning. 7 girls stood on the porch boards beneath the sagging roof, thin as fence rails and fierce as wolves around a den. Behind them, the gray Montana afternoon pressed low over the ranch, dragging the smell of wet hay, horse sweat, wood smoke, and old sorrow across the yard. A cracked white teacup sat on the porch rail, turned upside down, as if someone had set it there for a woman who was not coming back. "You can turn around now," the tallest girl said. Miriam looked at her, then at the mud on her dress, then at the trunk sitting crooked in the wagon behind her. She had ridden 12 miles from town with a teamster who had not stopped talking until the Briggs house came into view. Then he had gone quiet, as if even a loud man knew when a place had teeth. "I was told Mr. Briggs needed help," Miriam said. "We need our mother," said a smaller girl with yellow braids and a chin lifted too high for the tears shining under her lashes. "And you ain't her. If this story touches something tender in you, tell us where you are watching from. Leave your country or hometown in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about courage, family, and quiet love, please like, share, and subscribe." Now let's step back into the dust with Miriam. The tallest girl came down one porch step. She was maybe 16, with her dead mother's eyes, if the photograph visible through the front window told the truth. Her brown hair was pulled tight in a braid, and flowers streaked one cheek like war paint. "Eliza," a man's voice called from the barn. The girl did not turn. Miriam turned instead. Wesley Briggs came across the yard with a hammer in one hand, his sleeves rolled to the forearms, and a cut of fresh blood along his tongue. He was tall, dark-haired, and bent in the shoulders in a way labor alone did not explain. His hat brim cast half his face in shadow. His boots were caked in corral muck. He looked like a man who had been trying to hold a roof up with his bare hands for too long. He stopped when he saw the water, the bucket, the mud. "Eliza," he said again, lower this time. The girl's mouth tightened. She can still leave. Miriam could have. She had left worse places than that. 3 months earlier, she had stood beside a shallow grave outside Helena, while rain turned the dirt black over Amos Bradshaw. A husband who had been kind in public and hollow in private. A man who gambled away her sewing money and then died with nothing in his pockets but 2 buttons, a railroad receipt, and a debt note folded small as shame. Since then she had worked laundry, mending, nursing, kitchen fires, whatever could keep bread in her hand. But winter was coming down from the mountains, and the boarding house woman in town had already begun asking when Miriam meant to pay. So she looked at Wesley Briggs and said, "Is the position still open?" His eyes moved from her muddy dress to the girls on the porch. Not angry, not exactly, tired, maybe, and ashamed. "It is," he said. "If you still want it. I did not come 12 miles to be frightened by a bucket." One of the younger girls snorted despite herself. Eliza snapped her head toward the sound. Wesley wiped his bloody tomb on his trousers and came closer, but not too close. "I can pay $7 a month, room and board, housekeeping mostly. Some cooking, some watching the little ones when I'm in the far pasture schooling?" Miriam asked. His face shifted. "If you can manage it." "I can manage more than most people expect." That made him look at her fully. The smallest child, a dark-haired girl of perhaps 4, held a rag doll by one leg and watched Miriam from behind a post. Her eyes were rimmed red from crying or cold. She sucked 2 fingers and leaned into the post like she might sleep standing. Miriam's gaze moved over them one by one. Eliza, hard and guarding. A second girl, maybe 14, stood silent with a mending basket hooked on her arm. Her fingers pricked raw. A wiry child with cropped hair had a chicken tucked under one elbow, as if ready to throw it. 2 smaller girls clutched each other. One coughed into her sleeve and tried not to be heard. The little one with the doll whispered something into the doll's cotton head. There was hunger in that porch, not just for bread, hunger for order, for sleep, for someone who could touch the stove without making them remember another hand. The teamster cleared his throat behind Miriam. "Ma'am, you want your trunk down or not?" Miriam did not take her eyes off the porch. "Yes." Eliza came down another step. "We put snakes in Miss Porter's bed. Did they bite?" "No, then. You chose poorly." This time the girl with the chicken laughed outright. "Quick as a match strike." "Quick as a match strike." Eliza glared at her. "Hannah." Miriam walked to the wagon, took hold of one end of her trunk, and waited. Wesley set down the hammer and took the other. Together they carried it across the yard. It was not a fine trunk. Its leather straps were cracked, and one corner had been repaired with tin. Tied to the handle was a little blue ribbon, faded nearly gray. It had been around the last bundle of letters Miriam had received from her sister in Ohio, before the letters stopped coming. When they reached the porch steps, all 7 daughters stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking the door. Wesley looked up at them. "Move." No one moved. The second girl, the quiet one with the mending basket, looked at Miriam's muddy skirt and said, "Miss Porter cried before supper." "I don't cry before supper," Miriam said. "When do you cry?" asked the little one with the doll. Miriam climbed the first step, meeting the child's gaze. "Only when there is time for it." Something in the house went still. Eliza stepped aside 1 inch, then another. The others followed, not from welcome, but from curiosity. Sometimes curiosity opens a door that kindness cannot. The front room smelled of ash, sour milk, wool, and old lavender. Dust lay gray along the mantel except around one framed photograph of a woman with patient eyes and a soft mouth. A shawl, brown wool with a green border, hung over the back of a rocking chair beside the stove. No one had sat in that chair for a long time. Miriam could see it by the way the shawl had gathered dust at the folds. On the table stood 8 tin plates and 1 china plate with a blue flower along the rim. The china plate was clean. Set upside down beside it was the cracked white teacup from the porch rail's mate, waiting for someone gone. Wesley saw her notice it. His jaw tightened. "Girls," he said, "this is Mrs. Bradshaw." "You'll speak respectful, widow?" asked the child with yellow braids. Miriam unbuttoned one glove finger by finger. "Yes." "Then you know," the quiet 14-year-old said. The words were so soft they nearly disappeared. Miriam looked at her. Some of it. The girl dropped her eyes. Wesley carried the trunk toward a narrow room off the kitchen. "You can sleep here. It used to be the sewing room." No one said whose sewing room. The room held a small iron bed, a washstand, 2 crates, and a window looking toward the barn. On a hook behind the door hung a blue apron with a torn pocket. Miriam did not touch it. She set her carpet bag on the bed and listened as the daughters whispered beyond the wall. "Shall leave by morning." "No, by supper." "She ain't pretty like Miss Juno." Miss Juno smelled like rose soap. Miss Juno screamed when the mouse ran under her shoe. "I put it there." "I know." Miriam took off her hat, smoothed the dented brim, and placed it beside her bag. Then she rolled up her sleeves. When she returned to the kitchen, the girls were still watching. Wesley stood near the stove, as if uncertain whether to explain the household or apologize for it. Miriam lifted the stove lid. Ash choked the belly. The kettle was empty, A pot of beans sat cold, skinned over on top. On the counter, a loaf of bread had been cut by impatient hands, hacked ragged, and the heel was missing. Near the pantry door, a flour sack lay open with little finger trails in the dust. "Who tends the fire?" she asked. No answer. "Who gathers eggs?" The girl with the chicken lifted her chin. "I do. When the hens don't peck." Pearl, the yellow-braided child, hid her hands behind her back. "Who brings water?" "Hannah," Eliza said. "When she remembers." "I remember," Hannah muttered. "Palm freezes mean." "Who cooks?" A silence passed through the room like a draft under a door. Wesley said, "Eliza tries." "I burn things," Eliza said, daring Miriam to agree. "Burning is still cooking," Miriam said. "Just too far along." The smallest girl laughed into her doll. Miriam pointed to the flour sack. "I'll need water, kindling, and whatever eggs the hens are willing to surrender. You might glare while you work if it helps." No one moved until Wesley reached for a bucket. Miriam stopped him. "No, Mr. Briggs, they know where things are." It was the first small battle. Eliza crossed her arms. "We ain't your hired girls." "No," Miriam said. "You are hungry girls. That is worse. Hunger won where manners could not." Hannah set the chicken down and grabbed the egg basket. Pearl followed her, rubbing the red peck marks on her knuckles. The little one dragged her doll after them. The coughing child went to the wood box and lifted a piece too heavy for her thin arms. Miriam bent and took one end. "Your name?" "Mercy, Mercy. That log wants 2 hands and no pride." Mercy gave her a suspicious look, but she adjusted her grip. By dusk, the kitchen had changed. Not by miracle, by scraping. The ash bucket was full. The stove breathed again. Water steamed. Miriam turned flour, salt, lard, and sour milk into biscuits that rose uneven but golden. She cut potatoes thin and fried them with onion. She warmed the beans and stirred molasses through them to soften the old taste. When the food reached the table, no child spoke for several minutes. They ate like children who had learned to save appetite for fear it might be disappointed. Pearl tucked half a biscuit into her pocket. Miriam saw and said nothing. Wesley saw too. His face moved as if the biscuit had struck him. The little one with the doll fell asleep before finishing, cheek on the table, fingers still around a potato slice. "Nettie," Wesley said softly. "I'll take her," Eliza said, already rising. "No," Miriam said. "Finish your supper." Eliza froze. I always take her." "Tonight, you finish your supper while it is warm?" The girl looked at Wesley, expecting him to overrule. He looked at his oldest daughter with a pain so bare that Miriam turned away from it. Lisa," Miriam lifted Nettie. The child weighed less than her coat suggested. As Miriam carried her toward the little girl's room, Nettie murmured against her shoulder, "Mama, don't forget the cup." Miriam stopped in the hallway. Behind her, every fork went silent. Nettie's breath warmed the hollow of Miriam's neck. "The cup," she whispered again. "I want," Miriam said, though she did not know what promise she was making. The little girl's room held 3 narrow beds and 1 trundle. Quilts patched with old dresses covered them. On a peg hung a child's red scarf. On a chair sat a hairbrush with long auburn strands still caught in it. Miriam tucked Nettie into the trundle, placed the rag doll beside her, and stood in the dim room until the child's fingers let go of her sleeve. When Miriam returned, the cracked white teacup had been set beside the blue-flowered china plate. No one was eating. Wesley stood with both hands braced on the back of his chair. He looked at that cup as a thirsty man might look at a well he could not reach. Miriam stepped to the table. "Who washes?" Ruth, the quiet 14-year-old, lifted her hand. "Then I dry," Miriam said. The house breathed out, not healed, but interrupted. That first night, Miriam slept little. Mice moved inside the wall. Wind slipped under the window frame. Somewhere in the house, a child coughed, another whimpered, And once, near midnight, Miriam heard Wesley's boots on the porch. She rose and looked out. He stood in the yard without a coat, looking toward a fenced rise beyond the cottonwoods. A small wooden cross leaned there beneath a black sky. He held something in one hand. The moon came through thin cloud enough for Miriam to see it was a woman's hair comb. He stood there until the cold drove him in. Morning came gray and hard. Miriam found Eliza in the kitchen before dawn, setting the china plate and cracked teacup in their places. "Don't touch those," Eliza said without turning. "I wasn't going to." She sat there. "I supposed so." She liked coffee with cream. But the cow went dry last winter. Miriam moved to the stove. What was her name? Eliza's shoulders went stiff. "Clara." Miriam waited. Eliza struck a match and failed to light it. Her fingers shook, though her voice did not. "Mama's name was Clara Briggs, and you don't get to say it like you knew her." "No," Miriam said. "I only asked because a person ought not become just an empty chair." The match caught. Eliza stared at the flame until it burned close to her fingers, then shook it out too late and hissed. Miriam took her hand. Eliza tried to pull away, but Miriam held only long enough to look at the burn. "Cold water," she said. "It don't hurt. Lying wastes strength." Eliza gave her a sharp look. Then, strangely, she went to the pump. That day was not gentle. The Briggs daughters had driven off 4 women in 9 months, and they did not surrender their reputation easily. Hannah put a frog in Miriam's wash basin. Miriam carried it outside and released it in the garden. "A poor choice," she told Hannah. "Frogs are useful." Pearl spilled salt into the coffee. Miriam drank half a cup without changing her face, then said, "Next time use less. Mr. Briggs has done nothing to deserve the Dead Sea before sunrise." Wesley choked on his first swallow and pretended it was the cold. Mercy hid Miriam's boots behind the woodpile. Miriam went barefoot to the yard, found them, and brought back an armload of kindling while she was there. Mercy watched from the doorway, confused by a punishment that had turned into usefulness. June, the 6-year-old with yellow braids and a mouth too honest for comfort, announced at breakfast. "You walk like your shoes hurt." "They do," Miriam said. "Why wear them?" "Because the world is full of nails, snakes, and opinions." June considered that gravely. "I hate opinions." "So do I, most days," Ruth said, almost nothing. She moved like a shadow, mending socks, wiping Nettie's nose, smoothing Clara's shawl on the rocking chair whenever anyone brushed against it. At night, Miriam found her in the kitchen, darning by lamplight after everyone else slept. "You'll ruin your eyes," Miriam said. "They need socks. They need you able to see a needle next year." Ruth's needle paused. "Miss Albina said girls with no mother must grow faster." Miss Albina was wrong. Ruth's mouth trembled, but she bent over the sock again. "She came here for 3 weeks. Pearl bit her." "Did Pearl have a reason?" She said Miss Albina put Mama's shawl in a trunk. Miriam looked toward the front room. The shawl was still on the rocking chair, brown and green, in the lamplight. "Grief bites when words can't," Miriam said. Ruth whispered, "I don't want to forget her smell." Miriam sat across from her. She took up a sock from the basket and threaded a needle. "Then we won't wash the shawl yet." Ruth looked up. "But we will air it in the sun when the sun comes. Memory should not mildew." The girl pressed her lips together and nodded once. Over the next 2 weeks, Miriam learned the ranch by its wounds. The front gate sagged because one hinge had cracked. The barn roof leaked over the oat bin. The garden had gone to weeds, though carrots still hid under the soil if a person knew where to pull. The hens laid under the porch because the coop door had lost its latch. The water pump shrieked like a soul in torment. The laundry line had snapped and been tied back with baling twine. The corral fence leaned outward where a restless mare named Duchess rubbed against it each morning. Wesley worked from dark to dark. He mended fence, hauled hay, rode out after strays, fixed harness, butchered a pig, stacked wood, and returned to the house each evening with less of himself than he had taken out. He spoke gently to his daughters, but often from far away, as if he stood on one bank of a river and they stood on the other. Miriam did not chase him with comfort. She set coffee near his elbow. She cleaned the cut on his tomb when it festered. She put extra bread in his coat pocket before he rode out and said, "For the horse, if you refuse it." He looked down at the wrapped bread. "Duchess prefers oats. Then perhaps you can lower yourself to eat horse bread." He almost smiled. The daughters notice. Children notice everything, especially children who have lost enough to become watchmen. Eliza sharpened herself against Miriam daily. She criticized the bread, the sweeping, the way Miriam folded towels, the way she hummed under her breath while kneading dough. "Mama sang hymns," Eliza said one morning. "I know only two all the way through," Miriam replied. "You were humming a tavern song." "I was married to a man who preferred taverns." Eliza went still. Miriam dusted flour from her hands. "That is not a thing for little ears to carry." "But you are not little, and I will not pretend every dead spouse becomes holy in the ground." Eliza looked toward the barn, where Wesley was harnessing a team. "Pa loved Mama." "Yes, she loved him. I believe that too." "Then why are you here?" Miriam could have said, "Because your father hired me. Because I need wages. Because winter does not care who mourns." Instead, she pressed her palm into the dough and said, "Because love does not scrub floors after it dies. Someone must." That answer made Eliza angrier than any lie would have. She stormed outside and split kindling until blisters opened on her hands. By the end of October, the ranch had begun to sound different. The pump still shrieked, but less often, because Wesley greased it after Miriam left a rag and oil can beside his coffee with no comment. The hens returned to the coop after Hannah and Miriam fixed the latch with wire. The woodpile grew straight-backed and high, sorted by size, because Mercy liked things in rows and would cough less if she carried the lighter sticks. Laundry snapped clean on a new line. Pearl no longer hid bread every supper, though once Miriam found a biscuit tucked in the toe of her Sunday shoe and simply moved it to a tin on the pantry shelf, marked Pearl in charcoal. That tin changed more than any scolding could. Pearl opened it each morning to make certain something was still there. Some days Miriam put in a dried apple slice, some days a heel of bread, some days nothing, because trust must learn ordinary disappointment too. But the tin remained hers. Nettie stopped sucking her fingers at table. She still woke crying for Clara, but now she sometimes stumbled to Miriam's door and stood there until Miriam lifted the blanket. "You and Mama," Nettie whispered the first time. "No, you smell like soap." "I can smell worse if it would help." Nettie put her cold toes against Miriam's leg. "No." June began following Miriam to the garden, carrying Clara's old trowel. She asked questions without mercy. "Did your husband die bloody?" "No." "Did you like him?" "Sometimes." "Did he like you?" Miriam pulled weeds from around the carrots. "Sometimes." "That ain't much." "No." "Will Pa marry you?" Miriam's hands stilled around a weed root. June continued digging. "Mrs. Vale at church said he hired you because 7 daughters need taming and a widower needs warming." Miriam looked across the yard to where Wesley was teaching Hannah to set a horseshoe nail. His big hand hovered near the girl's small one, not taking over, only ready. "Mrs. Vale talks like a woman with an empty flour barrel," Miriam said, loud because there is little in it. June laughed so hard she fell backward into the dirt. That Sunday, Miriam met the town. Pine Hollow's little more than a main street laid between mud and sky, with a mercantile, church, blacksmith, barber, land office, and saloon leaning into each other against the wind. The Briggs wagon rolled in with all 7 girls washed, braided, buttoned, and resentful of cleanliness. Wesley wore his black coat, shiny at the elbows. Miriam wore her plain brown dress and mended gloves. People looked before the wagons stopped. Widowers were town property in places like that. So were motherless children. So were widows who took wages under their roof. Mrs. Vale, round as a flour sack and twice as pale, met them outside the church steps. Her bonnet ribbons fluttered in the wind. "Mr. Briggs," she said warmly, "girls, how well you all look." Eliza stiffened. Mrs. Vale's eyes moved to Miriam. "And you must be Mrs. Bradshaw. We heard you were very determined." Miriam unpinned Nettie's shawl where it had caught under her chin. "That depends who is telling it. I only meant, after what happened to the others, most women would have thought better of staying." Wesley's jaw tightened. Before he could speak, Miriam said, "Most women have a right to choose their thresholds." Mrs. Vale smiled with no kindness. "And some thresholds have dangers." Nettie pressed her face into Miriam's skirt. Eliza said, "We in dangers." Miriam rested one hand lightly on Nettie's shoulder, the other on Eliza's back. A touch so brief the girl could pretend it had not happened. "No, you are children." Something in her voice made Mrs. Vale blink. The church bell rang. They went in. Inside, the pew where the Briggs families sat had one place no one used. The girls arranged themselves around that empty space by habit. Wesley stood at the aisle end, looking down at it. Miriam saw his hand flex once, as if reaching into the past. Then Pearl whispered, "Mrs. Bradshaw can sit there." Eliza turned on her. "No, she can't." Pearl's face crumpled. "I didn't mean Mama's place. I meant there's room." The congregation had gone quiet in the way churches do when piety becomes appetite. Miriam stepped past the pew and sat at the far end, beyond Nettie, not in the empty place. She took Nettie onto her lap so the child could see. Wesley sat down at the aisle. The empty space remained between him and Ruth, holding Clara's absence like a folded blanket. During the hymn, Ruth did not sing. She held a small Bible with a pressed violet inside the cover. Miriam saw the name Clara Briggs written in fading ink. After service, Mr. Halpern from the bank approached Wesley near the wagon. He was a thin man with tidy whiskers and gloves, too clean for Montana. "Briggs," he said. "A word." Wesley sent the girls to climb into the wagon. Miriam pretended to adjust Mercy's scarf while listening. Halpern lowered his voice poorly. "The note comes due end of November. I hope we understand each other." "I understand numbers," Wesley said. "Understanding and paying are different talents. I pay with cattle prices soft." After losing 2 calves last freeze and hiring household help, Halpern's eyes flicked toward Miriam. "Sentiment is costly." Miriam tied Mercy's scarf a little too tightly. Mercy squeaked. Wesley looked at Halpern in a way that would have made a wiser man step back. "My household is not your ledger. No, but your land, my soon-be." Eliza heard that. Her face drained white. On the ride home, no one spoke for 3 miles. Then Hannah said, "Can a banker take a garden?" "No," Wesley said. "Can he take Duchess?" Wesley's hands tightened on the reins. "No." "Can he take Mama's grave?" Nettie whispered. "No," Wesley said, and his voice broke on that one small word. Miriam watched the road ahead. The sky was wide and pitiless. Money mattered more in such a place because there was so little to hide behind when it ran out. That night after the girls slept, Miriam found Wesley at the kitchen table with papers spread before him. Notes, receipts, a cattle tally, feed prices, a letter from a buyer in Bozeman. The lamp threw deep shadows under his eyes. He tried to gather the papers. "You needn't trouble yourself. I kept books for a dry goods store in Ohio before I married." His hands stopped. "I can add columns without fainting," she said. He leaned back, tired enough to let pride rest a moment. "It ain't good. Most ledgers aren't when read after midnight." She sat across from him. He turned the papers toward her. They worked in low lamplight while the house creaked around them. Wesley had cattle enough to survive, but not enough to meet the full note. unless prices rose or he sold breeding stock. There were repairs delayed too long, a doctor's bill from Clara's last illness, funeral lumber, store credit, feed. Miriam touched the doctor's bill. She was sick long, 4 months from first cough to burying. He said it plainly, but his eyes were on the brown shawl in the other room. Consumption? Miriam asked. At first they said lung fever. Then they said rest. Then they said nothing much at all. Aye, sorry. He rubbed both hands over his face. Girls took turns sitting with her. Eliza heard the last breath. I was in the barn getting a board to fix the bed frame because Clara kept saying it squeaked. He gave a short empty laugh. A bed frame. That's where I was. Miriam did not offer the easy pardon. A man grieving can choke on comfort. After a while she said, Amos died while I was hanging his shirts. Wesley looked up. They came to tell me. I was holding one sleeve and thinking the cuff would never come clean. He was already gone. For a long time I hated that shirt. Wesley's gaze softened, not with pity, but recognition. What did you do with it? He asked. Cut it into cleaning rags. The corner of his mouth moved. Miriam returned to the ledger. You need income before the note comes due. The garden has carrots, beets, late onions. Not enough. Hens can bring eggs if fed properly. Your girls can sew. Ruth's stitches are neat. I can make soap if we save ash and fat. There might be town women willing to buy what they are too proud to make. Mrs. Vale won't buy from my house. No, Miriam said, but women who dislike Mrs. Vale might. This time Wesley did smile, small and reluctant. Why help so much? He asked. She dipped the pen and wrote a figure in the margin. Because I live here. He looked at her then in a way that warmed her more than the stove. The soap began as a cold, ugly chore in the yard. Miriam showed the girls how to leach lye through hardwood ash, how to save fat, how to stir carefully, how to keep Nettie far back from the kettle. Mercy coughed less outdoors, so Miriam wrapped a shawl around her and let her count finished bars. Hannah carved crooked stamps from scrap wood. Pearl sniffed each batch as if judging a pie. June asked if soap could wash gossip off Mrs. Vale. Not that much soap in Montana, Miriam said. Ruth embroidered small cloth wrappers from feed sack scraps. Eliza refused to help for 3 days, then appeared with twine and said, Your knots are wrong. Miriam handed her the bundle. By mid-November, a shelf in the pantry held soap, dried herbs, mended gloves, 2 aprons, and jars of pickled beets. Wesley took them in a crate to the mercantile with Miriam beside him. Mr. Colby, the storekeeper, squinted at the goods. Folks don't usually buy from ranch kitchens. Folks usually bathe, Miriam said. Let us hope. He chuckled despite himself. Mrs. Vale entered while Colby counted the soap bars. Her eyes fell on Miriam's crate, then on Wesley standing near enough to her to be remarked upon. Well, she said, industry, cleanliness, Miriam replied. Mrs. Vale picked up a wrapped soap and sniffed. Lavender, wild mint, Ruth said from behind Miriam. Miriam turned. She had not realized Ruth had followed them into the store. Mrs. Vale lifted a brow. And does mint cure impropriety? Ruth shrank. Wesley set his hand on the counter. The sound was not loud, but every head turned. You'll speak plain if you have something to say, he said. Mrs. Vale's smile faltered. I only meant a widower's house can invite talk when a woman with no family stays there. Miriam felt the old heat of public shame rise up her neck. She had known that look after Amos died, owing half of Helena. She had known how women could weigh another woman's poverty and call it character. Before she could answer, Eliza pushed through the door, breathless from running. Behind her came Hannah and Pearl, cheeks red with cold. Eliza stood in the middle of the mercantile and said, Mrs. Bradshaw sleeps in the sewing room with a chair under the latch because Nettie wanders at night. She gets up before dawn. She makes Mercy tea when she coughs. She keeps Pearl's biscuit tin full. She don't sit in Mama's chair, and she don't need your mouth following her through town." The store went silent. Mrs. Vale flushed scarlet. "Eliza Briggs, your mother would be ashamed of that tone." Eliza's face changed. The blow landed where it had been aimed. Miriam moved, but Wesley was quicker. He stepped between Mrs. Vale and his daughter. "Don't use my wife's memory to strike my child," he said. "My wife, not Clara's name, not a shrine, a person. His." Mrs. Vale stepped back. Wesley's voice stayed low. "And do not speak against Mrs. Bradshaw again. Not in my hearing, not in my daughter's, not where your words can crawl back to my porch." Miriam could not look at him. She looked instead at Ruth's embroidered soap wrappers, at Hannah's muddy boots, at Pearl's hand tucked into Eliza's skirt. Mr. Colby cleared his throat. "I'll take the lot on commission, cash for half," Miriam said. He blinked. "We need flour," she added. Wesley glanced at her, and the smallest pride passed between them like a secret. That evening, Eliza avoided Miriam until chores were done. Then she came to the sewing room door and stood with her arms crossed. "I didn't defend you. I hurt. I defended us. I know." Eliza looked down the hall toward the untouched front room. "Mrs. Vale always liked Mama. She brought broth when Mama was sick. People can do kindness one day and harm the next." Eliza swallowed. "I hate that. So do I." The girl's mouth tightened, then trembled. She held it still by force. "Sometimes I can't remember her voice unless Nettie says something she used to say. Then I get mad at Nettie." Miriam leaned against the doorframe. "That must frighten you." Eliza's eyes filled. "If I stop keeping everything same, she'll be gone." Miriam thought of Amos' shirt cut into rags, of the blue ribbon tied to her trunk, of how memory sometimes becomes a locked room and calls itself love. "What if keeping everything same is making her hard to find?" Miriam asked. Eliza looked at her sharply. "Mothers live in more than chairs and cup," Miriam said. "She might be in how you braid June's hair, or how Ruth folds a hem, or how Pearl saves food because once your mother taught her not to waste. She might be waiting in things you do, not only things you refuse to touch." Eliza pressed both hands over her face. The sound she made was not a sob at first, but something smaller, like a board beginning to crack under weight. Miriam did not reach for her. "Not yet." At last Eliza whispered, "I miss being somebody's girl." Miriam's heart broke cleanly then. From the kitchen, Wesley's bootstep halted. He had heard. He did not enter. Miriam said softly, "You still are." Eliza shook her head hard. "Pa looks at us and sees her dying." Outside the room, the floorboard groaned under Wesley's weight. Eliza turned and saw him standing in the hall. For one terrible moment, father and daughter stared at each other across all they had not said. Wesley removed his hat, though he was indoors already. He held it against his chest like a man at a grave. "I see you," he said. Eliza's face crumpled. "I see you, Liza." That was all. One simple sentence. It did what sermons could not. She crossed the hall like a child again and struck his chest with both fists, not hard, but with months of fury. "You left me to do it." Wesley closed his arms around her. "I know. You let me be her. I know. I and her." "No." His voice broke. "You're my girl." Miriam stepped back into the sewing room and closed the door halfway, giving grief the privacy dignity requires. After that night, nothing became easy, but certain doors stayed unlatched. Eliza still snapped, but she slept later 2 mornings in a row, letting Miriam start the stove. Ruth stopped mending past midnight after Miriam made her a little basket labeled "Tomorrow." Hannah asked Wesley to show her how to mend harness properly, instead of pretending she already knew. Pearl began leaving half a biscuit in her tin rather than a whole one, as if testing whether the future could be trusted. Mercy let Miriam rub goose grease and herbs on her chest, When the cough worsened, June moved Clara's trowel from the mantel to the garden shed because tools get lonely when they ain't used. Nettie began calling Miriam, Mim, when she was sleepy, then denied it at breakfast. Snow came early the week before Thanksgiving. It fell first as dust, then as white sheets over the corral, the woodpile, the dead garden, the barn roof. The world drew close, sound softened, work sharpened. Wesley rode out with 2 hired hands to bring cattle down from the north draw before the storm closed fully. He meant to be back by dusk. By mid-afternoon, the sky had turned the color of iron. Wind drove snow sideways against the windows. Miriam kept the stove roaring and the girls busy, because idleness feeds fear. They dipped candles. They kneaded bread. Ruth read from Clara's Bible while Mercy leaned against Miriam's side, hot with a low fever. Pearl counted the dried apples. June tied and untied a ribbon around the doll's waist. Hannah kept going to the window. At dusk, no riders came. Eliza put on Wesley's old coat. Miriam blocked the door. No, he could be hurt. And you could be dead before the barn. I know the way in clear weather. Eliza's eyes blazed. You don't get to stop me. I do tonight. You ain't my mother. The words struck the room like a thrown plate. Nettie began to cry. Miriam felt every girl watching to see whether that sentence would drive her away at last. She picked up Wesley's lantern from the hook. No, she said. I am not. That is why I will not spend your life proving myself. Eliza stared, breathing hard. Miriam turned to Hannah. You know the cattle trails. Hannah blinked. Some. Draw me where your father went. Within minutes, the kitchen table held a crude map made from flower lines on dark wood. Hannah marked the north draw with a spoon. Ruth remembered a lined shack near the ridge. Wesley had once left tools there. If the storm caught them, he would head that way. Miriam made a decision that frightened her after it was made. Eliza, you stay with the little ones. Keep the stove fed. Mercy gets willow tea every hour. Ruth, you help. Hannah, you come with me to the barn. Eliza's mouth fell open. You just told me no. I told you no to running blind into snow. We are going to prepare. You can't ride like Pa. No. I can drive a wagon in bad weather, and Duchess knows the road better than any of us. Wesley would have forbidden it. That thought came and went. Wesley was not there to forbid or be saved by obedience. Miriam and Hannah fought their way to the barn with scarves over their mouths. Snow stung their eyes. Duchess stamped in her stall, uneasy but strong. Hannah's hands shook as she helped harness. You scared? Miriam asked. Yes, good. Fear makes fools of people only when they pretend not to have it. They hitched Duchess to the small wagon, loaded blankets, rope, a shovel, coffee, and a lantern. When they returned to the house door, Eliza stood there with Wesley's rifle. I'm coming, she said. No, Miriam said. Then take this. Their eyes met. Miriam took the rifle. The ride into the storm became a world of white breath and leather creak. Hannah crouched beside Miriam, holding the lantern low. The wagon wheels jolted over frozen ruts. Duchess leaned into the harness, ears pinned, trusting a road she could smell more than see. Twice Miriam nearly turned back. Then Hannah shouted, There! A faint glow pulsed through snow near the ridge, the lined shack. Miriam drove toward it until the wagon struck a drift too deep. She tied Duchess to a scrub pine and pushed through the rest on foot with Hannah behind her. At the shack door she heard coughing. A man groaned. Inside, the air smelled of blood, wet wool, and smoke. Wesley sat against the wall with one leg stretched stiff, his face gray. One hired hand, Tom, lay wrapped in a blanket, shivering. The other, Silas, held a bloody cloth to his forehead. A branch had come down, spooked the horses, and Wesley's mount had thrown him against rock. His ankle was swollen badly, might be broken. Wesley stared at Miriam as if fever had made her from snow. Miriam. She hated how her heart answered to her name in his mouth. You're a fool, he said weakly. Yes. She knelt beside his ankle And you are heavy, so save your strength. Hannah burst into tears when she saw him. Wesley reached for her. I'm all right, Sprout, you ain't, she sobbed. You're lying waste strength. Even in pain, his eyes flicked to Miriam. They got the men out because there was no other choice. Silas could walk with help. Tom could ride in the wagon. Wesley nearly fainted when Miriam and Hannah dragged him through the snow. Duchess pulled like a saint. The road home took twice as long. Might be more. Miriam's hands went numb. Hannah sang one of Clara's hymns through chattering teeth to keep Duchess steady. When the ranch lamps finally appeared, all 5 girls were in the yard against orders, wrapped in quilts, holding lanterns like small stars. Eliza ran to the wagon and saw Wesley. For once, she did not speak. They carried him in. Miriam cut off his boot before the swelling trapped it. Wesley cursed once, apologized to Nettie, then fainted. The girls froze at the sight. Water, Miriam said. Bandages. Ruth, the clean sheets. Eliza, hold the lamp. Hannah, breathe or sit down. Pearl, take Nettie to the stove. June, stop crying into the salve. I ain't crying, June sobbed. I admire your dryness. Hands moved. Fear became work. The doctor could not come until morning, so Miriam set the ankle as best she could, bound it, cooled his head, and kept him from slipping too far into fever. Near midnight he woke with her hand on his wrist, counting the pulse. Girls, he whispered. Safe. You went out. Yes. Could V died. So could you. His eyes closed. I can't lose more. The words came thin and unguarded. Miriam sat beside the bed in the room that had once been his and Clara's. She had not entered before that night. The room held a washstand, a trunk, a faded curtain, and on the wall, the photograph of Clara that had once been in the front room before Wesley moved it here for reasons only grief understood. On the dresser lay the bone-hair comb she had seen in his hand under moonlight. Miriam looked at it, then back at him. Neither can I. He opened his eyes. She had said too much, or just enough. By morning the storm had spent itself. The doctor came, set the ankle properly, and ordered Wesley off his feet for 6 weeks, Wesley argued. The doctor laughed without humor. You can argue from that bed or from a grave. Your choice. A ranch with its owner in bed reveals what kind of household it has become. Eliza took charge of the bond schedule. Hannah handled Duchess and the chickens. Ruth kept accounts with Miriam. Pearl measured flour carefully, no longer sneaking from the sack. Mercy sat near Wesley and read to him when her cough allowed, because his eyes tired. June carried messages no one asked her to carry, and some they wished she had not. Nettie brought Wesley the cracked white cup, every morning filled with more milk than coffee. Mama's cup helps, she told him. Wesley took it with both hands. Yes, it does. On the 3rd day, he asked Miriam to bring him the ledger. On the 4th, he tried to stand and Miriam pushed him back with one hand on his chest. His eyes widened. You are not made of iron, she said. No, Mom. The words slipped out softly, and the room warmed around them. But outside pressure does not wait for bones to mend. Mr. Halpern arrived one clear cold afternoon in a sleigh, wearing a fur collar and an expression of concern, polished to a shine. Miriam met him at the door with flour on her sleeves. Mrs. Bradshaw, he said, I need to speak with Mr. Briggs. He is resting. It concerns his debt. Then speak carefully. Halpern's mouth tightened. I have already extended patience. You have extended interest. Business is not charity. No. Nor should it be theft wearing gloves. His eyes hardened. You overstep. Wesley's voice came from behind her. Let him in. Miriam turned. Wesley stood in the hallway on crutches, pale with pain and stubbornness. Eliza hovered behind him, furious and frightened. Halpern entered the kitchen. The daughters gathered without being called. The banker removed papers from his coat. Given your injury and the likelihood you cannot meet the note, I am prepared to offer a solution. Sell the east pasture now. I have a buyer. You keep the house and immediate acreage. Your debt clears. Wesley's face changed. Miriam knew before anyone spoke. The east pasture was not just land. It was future herd, hay, shelter, the difference between surviving and shrinking until the ranch became a memory. No, Wesley said. Halpern sighed. Pride is expensive. So is surrender. You have 7 daughters. Consider them. I am. The banker glanced at Miriam. Then consider whether your judgment is being influenced by household attachments. A widower made lonely can mistake comfort for counsel. Eliza stepped forward, but Miriam lifted one hand. Wesley looked at Halpern. Say what you mean. I mean this house has become the subject of talk. I mean your hired widow seems to have taken a place beyond wages. I mean, a court might look differently on a man's decisions if he is seen as neglecting financial duty for improper domestic arrangements. The room went very still. Miriam felt the girls around her like 7 struck matches. Wesley's hands tightened on the crutches. Pain shone on his face, but something stronger rose beneath it. You came into my house, he said slowly, to threaten my land, insult a woman under my roof, and frighten my children. I came to collect what is owed. No, Miriam said. Everyone looked at her. She untied her apron, folded it once, and placed it on the table. No, Mr. Halpern came because he has a buyer already waiting for that pasture. Likely someone who knows its spring runs clean and early. Someone who knows the railroad survey might pass close enough to make land worth triple. Halpern's eyes flickered. Wesley turned his head. Railroad? Miriam kept her gaze on the banker. Amos Bradshaw owed money to men who talked freely when they thought a wife was only washing shirts. I learned to hear profit before it was named. Mr. Halpern is not worried you cannot pay. He is worried you might. The girls stared at her. Halpern's face had gone flat. Be careful. I have been careful my whole life, Miriam said. It has not made dishonest men gentler. Wesley looked from her to Halpern. Get out. The note will be paid on the date written. Not today, not with pasture. Halpern gathered his papers slowly. You will regret taking advice from a woman whose own husband died insolvent. Miriam went cold. The old shame opened under her feet. Then Ruth, quiet Ruth, stepped to the pantry and took down the small cash box where they kept soap earnings, egg money, sewing payments, and every spare coin saved from flour and lamp oil. She set it on the table. My mother taught me a fine stitch, Ruth said, voice trembling but clear. Mrs. Bradshaw taught me what to charge for it. Hannah dug into her pocket and placed 3 coins beside the box. Duchess sold shoes, sold them to blacksmith for scrap. Pearl ran to the pantry and returned with her biscuit tin. She opened it. Inside were 2 pennies, a dried apple slice, and half a biscuit hard as stone. She put the pennies on the table and kept the biscuit. Mercy brought a stack of wrapped soap from the shelf. June added a jar of buttons, then took back the blue one because it was too pretty for Banks. Nettie placed the rag doll on top of the cash box, then reconsidered and hugged it to her chest. Eliza walked to the front room. She returned carrying Clara's brown shawl with the green border. Wesley whispered, Lisa. Eliza held it against her a moment. Then she folded it carefully and laid it beside the box, not as payment, but as witness. This house ain't empty, she said. Not anymore. Halpern looked at the table, at the girls, at Wesley, at Miriam. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Miriam picked up the apron and tied it back around her waist. Good day, Mr. Halpern. After he left, Wesley remained standing too long. His face went white. Miriam and Eliza reached him at the same time, one on each side, and helped him to the chair. No one spoke. Then June said, Do we have to give the banker my buttons if he comes back? Wesley laughed. It hurt him. He laughed anyway. The sound filled the kitchen like the first crack in river ice. Payment day came under a hard blue sky. They did not have enough, not until Mr. Colby rode out that morning with a ledger of his own and a pouch of coins from goods sold faster than expected. Not until Silas, the hired hand, refused half his wages until spring. Not until Tom's brother bought 2 young steers for a fair price. Not until Mrs. Vale, shamefaced and stiff-backed, arrived with an order for 12 bars of wild mint soap and 6 embroidered handkerchiefs. She stood in the kitchen doorway, eyes lowered. "I spoke poorly," she said. Eliza watched like a hawk. Mrs. Vale swallowed. "Grief made me loyal to a memory and cruel to the living. That is no Christian excuse. It is only the truth." Miriam looked at Clara's shawl, now hanging in sunlight by the window after Ruth had shaken it out, and cried into it for nearly an hour. "Truth is better than excuse." Mrs. Vale nodded. She turned to Eliza. "Your mother would have admired your courage." Eliza's chin trembled. "She'd have told me not to sass in church." "She might have admired that too, privately." Eliza looked startled, then almost smiled. When the coins were counted at last, Wesley sat at the kitchen table with the note before him, his bad ankle propped on a stool. His hands rested on either side of the money. He looked as though victory had exhausted him more than defeat. "We can pay," Ruth whispered. Pearl opened her biscuit tin and looked inside just to make sure. Wesley lifted his eyes to Miriam. "You saved the ranch?" "No," she said. "We found the money. You saved more than the ranch. The room held too many daughters for such a sentence." Miriam looked away first. Wesley went to town with Eliza driving the wagon and Miriam beside him, because the road was rutted and his ankle still ached. At the bank, Halpern counted the money twice. Wesley signed the receipt. Miriam watched until the note was marked paid in full. Outside, on the boardwalk, wind moved dust along the street, though snow still lay in shadow. Wesley folded the receipt and put it in his coat. "Mrs. Bradshaw," he said. Miriam's heart tightened at the formality. "Yes, I've been thinking on wages. I see. I owe you back pay. You owe me $4 and a new pair of bootlaces if we are being exact." His mouth twitched. "I owe you more than that." She looked toward the horses, because looking at him had become dangerous. He continued, quiet. "I don't want you staying at the ranch, because winter leaves you no choice. I don't want gratitude mistaken for asking. And I won't have my daughters thinking a woman must serve a house until it decides she belongs." Miriam could not speak. He removed his hat. Main Street moved around them, wagons, boots, distant hammering. But they stood in a stillness of their own. "I am asking you to stay because I want your voice at my table," he said. "Because my girls look for you when a door opens. Because coffee tastes wrong now if you haven't scolded first. Because when I wake in that house, I don't only hear what is missing anymore." Miriam held her gloves tight in one hand. "That ain't a proposal," he added softly. "Not unless you wanted to become one someday. It is only the truth standing here with its hat in its hand." She breathed once, carefully. "Wesley," she said. His name seemed to move through him. "My first marriage taught me how lonely a woman can be beside a man. I will not enter another house as a shadow, not for shelter, not for kindness, not even for children I have come to love." His eyes shone, but he did not look away. "If I stay," Miriam said, "I stay as myself. Yes, with wages while I earn them. Yes, with say in the girls' schooling." A smile touched him. "God help them, yes, and Clara's place not erased to make room for me." His face softened. "Miriam, you're the one who helped us find her again." There, on the boardwalk in Pine Hollow, with a paid banknote in Wesley's pocket and winter sun on the false fronts of town, Miriam felt something inside her loosen that had been tied for years. Not love declared, not yet. Something humbler and stronger. Room. When they returned to the ranch, all 7 girls ran out before the wagon stopped. Eliza tried not to look anxious and failed. Ruth held her mending basket. Hannah had hay in her hair. Pearl carried the biscuit tin. Mercy wore 2 scarves, though the day was mild. June had ink on her nose. Nettie dragged her doll through mud. "Well?" Eliza demanded. Wesley held up the receipt. The yard erupted. Hannah whooped loud enough to scare the hens. Pearl danced in place, clutching her tin. Mercy cried and coughed and laughed until Ruth wrapped an arm around her. June shouted, "We still got my buttons." Nettie asked if the banker was dead, and Miriam said, "No, only disappointed." Eliza stood still, receipt in hand, reading the words, though she had to sound out half of them. "Paid in full." Then she looked at Miriam. "You're staying?" she asked. Miriam stepped down from the wagon. "If the position remains open." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "We might still put snakes in your bed, then I might still make you wash sheets." Eliza nodded as if the terms were acceptable. That evening, the house changed in a way everyone saw. Not grandly. Homes rarely heal grandly. Ruth took Clara's shawl from the window and laid it over the rocking chair. But this time she shook the dust from the chair first. Eliza removed the clean china plate from the table and set it carefully in the cupboard, not hidden, only rested. Pearl placed 1 biscuit in the center of the table instead of her tin, broke it into pieces, and gave 1 to each person. Hannah hung the repaired harness by the door. Mercy put a jar of dried mint beside the stove. June filled a chip cup with late wildflowers gone brown at the edges. Nettie carried the cracked white teacup to Wesley. "For Mama?" she asked. Wesley looked at the cup for a long time. Then he took it and set it on the mantel beneath Clara's photograph. "For Mama," he said. Nettie considered this. "Can Miriam have coffee in the other cup?" Eliza sucked in a breath. Wesley looked at Miriam. Miriam felt the whole room waiting. "There is no hurry," she said. But Ruth had already gone to the cupboard. She took down a plain tin cup, polished bright from years of use, and set it at Miriam's place. "Not Mama's," Ruth said. "Yours." Miriam touched the rim. It was warm from the shelf near the stove. Supper that night was stew thick with carrots from the rescued garden, bread with a hard crust and soft heart, beans sweetened with molasses, and coffee strong enough to carry a tired soul across morning. Wesley sat at the head of the table, his ankle still bound. Eliza sat beside him, not in Clara's place, but near enough that their shoulders touched when she reached for bread. Miriam sat between Nettie and Mercy, with June's flowers crooked before her. Outside, the Montana wind moved over the dark pasture. The repaired gate held. The hens settled in the coop. Duchess stamped once in the barn and went quiet. In the front room, Clara's saw rested in the rocking chair, no longer guarding a tomb, but keeping a memory warm. Later, after dishes were washed and little girls tucked under quilts, Miriam stepped onto the porch with 2 cups of coffee. Wesley stood there on his crutches, looking toward the cottonwoods and the small cross beyond them. She handed him 1 cup. "You should not be standing long," she said. "I'm not good at being still," I noticed. They watched the last light leave the snow. For a while, neither spoke. At last Wesley said, "Clara would have liked you." Miriam looked at the cup in her hands. "Amos would not have liked you." Wesley turned, startled. "He disliked men who paid debts," she said. A laugh moved through him, quiet and real. Then silence came again, but this time it did not bruise. Inside, Nettie murmured in her sleep, "Not Mama this time," not in fear. "Meme," she whispered, soft as a coal settling. Miriam closed her eyes. Wesley heard it too. He did not reach for her hand, not yet. He only shifted his crutch, stepped closer against the cold, and stood beside her while lamplight from the kitchen spread gold across the porch boards. By Christmas, curtains hung in the front windows, sewn from flour sacks bleached and stitched with Ruth's tiny blue flowers. The barn roof no longer leaked. The woodpile stood higher than Wesley's shoulder. The pump handle moved smooth and quiet after Hannah took it apart and greased it under Wesley's proud supervision. Pearl's biscuit tin now held buttons, string, 2 pennies, and sometimes candy she forgot to hide. Mercy's cough eased when Miriam moved her bed away from the draft, and Wesley sealed the window frame. June learned 3 hymns and 1 tavern song, though she was forbidden to sing the tavern song at church. Nettie stopped wandering at night unless thunder came. Eliza began school lessons again with a scowl and a hunger she tried to disguise. She was good with numbers, better than Wesley. When Miriam told her so, Eliza said, "My baby, I'll run a bank and never steal land. A noble profession," Miriam replied. On Christmas Eve, snow fell straight down, gentle and thick. The girls decorated the house with pine boughs, dried apple rings, red yarn, and paper stars cut from old catalog pages. Wesley carved a small horse for Nettie and a new handle for Clara's trowel. Miriam made gingerbread with precious molasses and let Pearl lick the spoon. After supper, Ruth brought Clara's Bible to the table. For the first time, she read aloud without crying. When she finished, she left the Bible open in the center of the table instead of closing it away. Wesley looked at his daughters, then at Miriam. There were no speeches. The best vows in a hard country are often not spoken first. They are stacked in woodpiles, folded into clean shirts, counted in coins, carried through snow, poured into cups, and kept at tables where there is finally enough room for the living and the dead. Near spring, when the first thaw ran silver off the barn roof, Wesley asked Miriam to walk with him to the garden. His ankle had healed crooked enough to ache before storms, but strong enough for work. The girls watched from the kitchen window and pretended not to. The garden was still mostly mud. June's trowel stood stuck in one corner like a flag. Miriam wore her brown shawl. Wesley carried his hat in his hand though the wind was cold. At the garden gate, he stopped. "Miriam," he said, "I won't ask you to mend what cannot be mended. I won't ask you to mother grief out of my girls. I won't ask you to be grateful for less than respect." She looked at him, at the lines hard work and sorrow had put beside his eyes. "What are you asking?" He took from his coat pocket the blue ribbon that had once been tied to her trunk. She had not known it had come loose. He had saved it. "I'm asking whether you might build the rest with me," he said. "Slow as you need, honest as we can, with Clara remembered, with Amos not feared, with 7 daughters whom I still bite." Miriam looked toward the window. 7 faces vanished at once. She laughed, and tears came with it. Wesley waited. That was why she loved him, not because he filled silence, but because he had learned to stand in it without forcing her to cross. "Yes," she said, "slow, honest, and if anyone bites, I choose the punishment." His smile broke open then, young and disbelieving. From inside the house, June screamed. She said, "Yes," Eliza shouted. "You weren't supposed to listen." Pearl began crying. Mercy began coughing because Pearl was crying. Hannah ran outside without a coat. Ruth stood in the doorway with both hands over her mouth. Nettie dragged a rag doll through mud and wrapped herself around Miriam's knees. Wesley looked at the noisy, muddy, half-mended, wholly living world around him and laughed until he had to lean on the gate. That summer, the east pasture came green and deep. The railroad passed 5 miles south and did not take the land, but the rumor of it lifted prices enough that Wesley bought 3 more cows and a new stove door. The garden gave peas, carrots, beans, and sunflowers taller than June. Miriam taught the girls to keep accounts, mend seams, read contracts, bake bread, set fence staples, and never confuse softness with surrender. On the day Miriam Bradshaw became Miriam Briggs, there was no grand church crowd, only family, a few neighbors, and Mrs. Vale crying into a handkerchief Ruth had embroidered and sold to her at full price. Wesley wore his black coat. Miriam wore a cream dress made over from old curtains, with a blue ribbon stitched inside the cuff where only she knew it rested. After the vows, Eliza handed her Clara's shawl. Miriam shook her head at first. Eliza's eyes filled, but her voice was steady, not to replace her, to be warm, so Miriam took it. That evening, they ate at the long table Wesley had built from spare boards, because the old one had grown too small for all the life around it. There were flowers in June's chip cup, curtains moving in the soft wind, bread cooling under a towel, coffee waiting near the stove, and 7 daughters arguing over who had fed the hens, when all of them had forgotten. Wesley sat beside Miriam, not across an empty space anymore. Under the table, Nettie leaned against Miriam's knee and fell asleep before dessert, one sticky hand open on her lap. Pearl slipped her an extra cookie and did not hide one for herself. Mercy breathed easy. Hannah smelled of horse and sunshine. Ruth's hair had come loose from its pins. June sang the Forbidden Tavern's song until Eliza clapped a hand over her mouth. Eliza complained about the noise, but she was smiling when she said it. After supper, Miriam stepped onto the porch. The repaired fence ran straight into the gold of sunset. The barn stood solid. Smoke lifted from the chimney. Behind her, the house clattered with dishes, laughter, chairs scraping, and Wesley's low voice telling the girls to leave some peace for the angels. Miriam looked toward the little cross beneath the cottonwoods, where evening light touched the grass. She thought of Clara's cup on the mantel, Amosert long ago turned to rags, the bucket of cold water at her feet the day she arrived, and 7 grieving daughters who had tried with all their might to drive every woman away. They had not broken her, but that was not the miracle. The miracle was that she had not broken them either. She had stayed. They had stayed. And in a country where wind could strip paint from boards and sorrow could empty a room for years, staying had become its own kind of love. Inside, Wesley called her name. Miriam turned from the sunset and went back into the warm house, where her cup waited at the table, filled before she asked,